spooky friends, and welcome to another episode of the Scaryish podcast.
Woo.
I'm Robin Grace, and this is Adam Diaz.
Hello.
And
that's a 3 a.m. woo for you.
And yeah, we're here to talk to you folks about some interesting things we've researched this week. What's your topic this week, Adam?
So this week I'm going to be covering a place known as Cannibal Island, and it's just as exciting as it sounds.
All right.
What about you?
I'm going to be covering the true story behind the haunting in Connecticut.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
I saw you had it on the background too. So
yes, I did. I watched 3 horror movies tonight.
Was it like a word-for-word adaptation of what really happened?
No.
So I will say I covered in like episode 80-something or other the Haunting in Connecticut 2's storyline. So we did do some research to make sure we haven't covered this one before, and it does not look like we did, which is nice to see. But yeah. Good stuff. I'm excited to hear it.
Thank you.
Let's just talk about what we went through over the weekend. So we were out in we're out in Pasadena for Anime Pasadena, which was pretty fun. It was mellow as far as cons go. But we had a good time. You're welcome to the city of Pasadena. Thank you for having us in you.
We got to see the Suicide Bridge in Pasadena. I forget what the name of the actual bridge was.
But we've covered it.
But we have covered it in the past. And it was really cool to drive down there at night.
Ominous.
It was because there's nothing. There's nothing near it. It's this random bridge at night, at least, in the middle of darkness, right? It's dark on both sides.
Directly next to the freeway, too.
It is. But all you see is this dark bridge and then the lampposts as you're driving through this bridge. And it's very creepy. I can see why people would flock to this bridge to do this type of thing.
It's such a far drop off out of nowhere, too.
Yeah, it's very odd.
They had, 12, 13-foot fencing?
Yeah, there's huge fences
blocking the entire
off.
thing so that you couldn't go anywhere near the edge. You'd have to climb that to go. I mean, you could climb it, but it would definitely make you think about what you're doing before you did it. It wouldn't just be show up and throw yourself off. So
yeah,
it's nice to see that there's some sort of deterrent there. But yeah, it was pretty creepy, kind of forlorn when we drove across it.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
it was interesting to kind of check out. Aside from that, though, no major things that happened this past weekend. So got some life events coming up this week, which we'll probably talk about on story time. Let's just do that for story time, huh?
Sure.
Okay, cool. So, all right, let's go ahead and dive into topics. I believe Robin's going to be going first this week, so I will let you take it away.
All right, so my topic, again, this week is going to be the true story behind the haunting in Connecticut. And it's a movie that I love, right? I watch it way too often, I think. It was released in 2009, so it is not a new movie. If you have not watched it by now, there's going to be some spoilers.
You should probably watch it. I mean, realistically, I kind of like hearing the true stories behind stuff and then watching it to compare.
Really? All right.
Yeah, I think it's more fun for me.
It's an American supernatural horror film based in 1987. It's based around the Cannibal family who are moving into a home closer to a hospital where their son is receiving cancer treatments.
Which you got from working in the soup factory, which their family owns.
No. In the movie, the mother is driving their son back and forth between their house and the hospital, and it's such a long drive that he's having all these horrible reactions to the medication, and she's seeing how much in pain he is, right? Or how much pain he's in, I guess is the right grammar. And so as she's driving down this road, she sees this house going for rent, and she checks it out. It's a huge house for a steal. The price is ridiculously low because this man just can't keep a tenant. And so this guy's like, okay, well, if you want to rent it, I'll toss in the first month free. And it just seems like a dream for her. It's perfect. It's closer to the hospital.
It's too good to be true.
It's too good to be true. So the whole family arrives soon after. And it includes a couple cousins. Everyone that comes, it's like the dad and then children. So I think there's one older cousin and then kids. And the son, Matt, our main focus, chooses the basement where there is a door that mysteriously will not open. They find out that the house used to be a funeral home / mortuary. And the kid talks to some other patients at the hospital about some strange visions he's having. One of these patients happens to be a priest, of course, because you can't have a
scary movie without a priest,
right,
apparently, or a religious individual.
This priest / Reverend Nicholas advises Matt to find out what the spirit wants. So weird stuff starts happening. Matt starts having these really weird and horrible things start happening to him. At one point in the movie, his whole body gets carved in symbols, like into his skin. The family is stressed out from his illness and all the strange behavior. The children find like boxes and tins filled with things, including photographs of a young man that they God damn it. The photographs are of a young man that they find out later is named Jonah, and there's pictures of him during a seance where there's ectoplasm coming out of his mouth. It's like this big huge cloud of gross, right?
And isn't that the poster is like ectoplasm?
That is like the cover. Yeah, the cover of the movie. And then they also find a tin full of eyelids. So,
That's
you know,
fucking gross.
And they find a lot of stuff and some pictures from the funeral home when it was a funeral home. So there's pictures of dead people. Wendy, the eldest girl, and our boy Matt do some research and learn that the funeral home used to be run by a man named Ramsey Aikman, who did psychic research and hosted seances and things like that. Jonah disappears during one of these seances because he's like the medium, right? But he disappears during one of these seances. Reverend Nick theorizes that necromancy has something to do with everything that's going on in the home, clued in by the tin full of eyelids. Other stuff happens, but I don't really want to spoil the movie because
now we're worried about spoilers.
Well, a lot of stuff happens in this movie. That I don't want to ruin like the jump scares and things like that for you guys, but you just have to watch it. Just know that there are ghosts, lots and lots of ghosts and evil deeds that have occurred within the movie. And with lots of horror movies, it does have a climax and a resolution.
I mean, I think most movies do in general.
Yeah.
Unless they're doing it wrong.
I don't know. There are some bad movies out there that you're just like, why won't this movie end? And this movie is honestly one of the horror movies that I've watched over 10, 20 times. I've watched it so many times. I don't know why. I just enjoy this particular one. It's scary and good. And maybe it's not the best horror movie out there, but it's something that I like to just put on in the background. I don't know why. Even though I know what's going to happen, it's just like, it's entertaining, you know?
You're allowed to like it. It's fine.
This movie is supposedly based on true events. And they say that in the movie, right? Based on true events.
And now you're going to tell us what those events are.
So, of course, there's always controversy surrounding these statements. But according to Ed and Lorraine Warren, the Snedeker house filled these lines pretty well. Filled in these lines. They were just like, this is the house that inspired this movie, pretty much. So the true story is thought to be based on the Snedeker family. And Cameron and Alan Snedeker moved into 208 Meriden Avenue in Southington, Connecticut on June 30th, 1986. It's a big house, little rent. They're having some financial hardship, so the reduced rent was a steal. They needed it. Their son Philip was in the hospital, just like in this movie. After the family moved in, they start looking into the house that they're living in. They find that their home used to be a mortuary called the Halahan Funeral Home in the 1920s. It existed as such for decades, so there were a lot of bodies that have moved throughout this house. Much like in the movie, they find the mortuary equipment in the basement. Which is, spoilers, something that happens in the movie. It was hidden behind some building materials, though, so that's why they never found it in real life. Among the items were toe tags and personal items of the deceased.
Like eyelids.
I'm sure they didn't actually find eyelids. Not only that, they also found a graveyard out back. So there was a graveyard out back.
Can you imagine getting a property and someone being like, and you have a graveyard now?
I feel like a lot of ranches, old, like, big pieces of land have a graveyard somewhere out there.
It's like we have a pile of bones that are buried in the yard somewhere.
They also, like in the movie, find drawers full of creepy corpse photographs. And it's just like, you know, how they prop people up to make them look however they want them to look. Yeah. These things weren't necessarily out of the ordinary during the era in which the house was a funeral home, you know, the 1920s. I'm sure it was just something that they did, right? The family claims that after moving in, they began experiencing hauntings. They claimed to hear strange sounds within the home. There would be changes in temperature in different rooms and even apparitions of dead people that would appear. Even the scent of what could be described as rotting flesh permeated areas of the home, supposedly.
Gross.
Philip did have cancer like Matt in the movie, so moving closer to the hospital was a necessity for them, right? According to Philip's mother, they were never told that the house used to be a funeral home when they moved in. She also never went into the basement because renovation materials were blocking their way into the basement. Once the whole family moved in, though, the basement would become home to two of their sons. The two of their sons moved down there to, you know, occupy the basement. From the very first night in the home, Philip complained of hearing strange voices and sounds. He even described having seen shadow creatures staring at him as he slept, which is creepy. Supposedly, he became so terrified of his basement room that he asked to be allowed to stay in the hospital. His hallucinations, quote unquote hallucinations, things that he was seeing, were kind of like dismissed as a side effect of the medication that he was taking at the time as part of his treatment. The former owner, however, claims that the family was fully aware before having moved in that it used to be a funeral home. So it's a game of they said, and I say they said, and not he said, she said, because
pronouns.
It's exclusionary. So Carmen, Philip's mother, also claims that she was the one that saw the water turn red while she was mopping the floor in the basement, because that happens in the movie.
That's creepy.
Yeah. But in the movie, Matt is the one hallucinating, seeing the blood on the floor while she's mopping. She even said that their bed would vibrate with what seemed like a heartbeat during a TV interview. She claimed that dishes would put themselves away and the lights would flicker and glow even without bulbs in them.
These all seem very helpful.
What?
The lawn would also cut itself.
She was most especially afraid of the apparitions that she saw. Most specifically, one with long black hair and black eyes, and another with white hair and white eyes in a pinstripe tux. I don't know who would be wearing that in the history of the home, but sounds like interesting looking
someone probably
ghosties
that came through, I would say.
She reported to the Huffington Post that there was an incident where the shower curtain very quickly wrapped around her and she couldn't push it off. There's a bunch of movies that have had that in it where the shower curtain comes down and tries to suffocate the person in the shower, right? She thought something was trying to kill her. As this happened in the 1980s, I'm trying to think what movies came out that had that already happen in it during the 1980s. There were already a bunch of like Friday the 13th ones, right?
I've definitely seen it in movies before. I can't tell you which movie it was, because if it was Friday the 13th, it wouldn't just be a ghost doing it. It would have been Jason Voorhees doing it. So I can't quite
think of anything off the top of your head with ghosts that want to suffocate people in shower curtains.
Correct.
Their youngest son, Bradley, was the one that experienced the uncontrollably spinning gurney that was portrayed in the movie. Because in the movie, Matt, the main guy, is spinning this table that they use to work on the bodies with, right? And he's just spinning it with his brother, his cousin, or whatever on it. He's just spinning it and spinning it. And the kid's just like telling him to stop, but he's so zoned out on whatever he's hallucinating that he's just not stopping the spinning. I don't know. So apparently that really happened. And the attack of Matt on his cousin in the film actually occurred in real life. So Philip was the one that was doing the attacking, and he was taken away in an ambulance and forced to stay in a mental institution for 45 days.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a long
which is
commitment.
a long commitment. He was actually diagnosed with schizophrenia after speaking about the spirits that were talking to him. His family said that after these events, Philip became dark and distant, and even to the point of being violent, like a complete personality shift. He was a completely different person. Allegedly, he broke into a home of neighbors in order to steal a gun to hurt his stepfather, Alan, too.
Wow.
After experiencing these things, the family decided to bring in some paranormal investigators, because why wouldn't you if your house is possessed, right? That set of paranormal investigators included Ed and Lorraine Warren, because of course there's a haunting.
They're going to be involved.
They're going to be there. Though the Haunting in Connecticut movie doesn't mention them, really, if at all, in the movie, because it's more focused around the family. It's not focused around the Warrens at all. It is not part of the Conjuring universe. Though it is a case that they worked on, it has nothing to do with the Warren movies that have like The Conjuring, The Nun, and all that fun stuff.
Right.
The investigators moved into the home for about 9 weeks. So they were with this family for about 9 weeks. They wanted to spend as much time there as possible in order to experience everything that this family was claiming. During their stay, they reported seeing members being slapped and beaten, even pushed and slammed to the floor by unseen entities. By the end of their stay, they rated the possession to be a 9 out of 10, and that the house was, quote-unquote, infested with demons.
Wow. 9 out of 10 is a pretty high rating. I didn't realize that's how they rated their possessions on a scale of...
It just seems like
1 to
bullshit,
10.
though.
Yeah.
Like, of all places to be rated a 9 out of 10, you know, Amityville, I could see being, you know...
That was probably 10 out of 10.
Yeah. That's the extreme on the scale. I don't think this house... that there was no murder, you know, so I don't think it could be counted as a 9 out of 10.
But a bunch of people who were being laid to rest went through it when it was previously a funeral home.
That's true. It's just weird to me where if Amityville is a 10,
we're guessing though. We're speculating that Amityville would be the 10. So it's like the most famous American haunted house. I feel
but a whole family got brutally murdered in there, you know. This house doesn't have any murder. There just is a bunch of dead bodies that have come through.
So you're saying it's overrated as far as haunted locations go?
I wouldn't give it a 9 out of 10. But unlike the movie's portrayal of the funeral home owner as being a necromancer, these investigators came in and thought that it was more of a necrophiliac type variety. Carmen, the mom, claims that it's true that they were convicted, the person who owned it was convicted of the crime, but there's no documentation proving that it was indeed a crime that occurred. The Warrens thought that it was necessary to perform a full-scale exorcism on the home, after which it was deemed, quote-unquote, cleared.
Wow.
This house is cleared. The current owner of the home, Susan Trotta Smith, claims that the home was never haunted then and is not haunted now.
It's interesting that the current owner would claim that, because it's like there's two ways it either goes. One, like, it's not haunted, stop talking about it, stay away from my property, which seems to be the case for a lot of people that are more down to earth. And the second one is like, oh my God, it's so haunted, please rent my Airbnb, which is what goes on for the Perrin family residents, I believe. So
their upstairs neighbor, while they lived there, Sandy, said that she never heard anything strange while living there. And she stated that nothing strange was reported by the family either, not until rent was behind.
Ah, that's interesting.
So once they were getting behind on rent and they needed money, they started coming out with stories of the house being haunted. A good part of the whole thing is that when the family did leave the house, Philip's cancer went into remission, and he went on to have children of his own.
That's really
because
good news.
in the movie, the main guy, Matt, leaves afterwards, and his cancer completely goes away. But unfortunately, the real life counterpart, Philip, his cancer actually did come back. So it came back eventually, and he passed away January 9th, 2012, at the age of 38.
That's really sad.
Yeah. So he had quite a few years, you know, after the whole incident.
Yeah.
But it's just sad that still happened. So unfortunately, it's not a completely happy story at the end, as the movie would have you believe. There are, of course, bound to be controversy surrounding the Warrens, similar to that of the Lutz, the Amityville horror case, right? Those living in the house before and after claim to have never experienced any evil entities. There are those that have reported Ed Warren of making people just use whatever testimonies that they could get and then just have them make up the rest. So it's just, they wanted everything to be as scary as possible, and they didn't care about the credibility or honesty or anything like that. They just wanted to make it as epic as possible.
I feel as we begin the first episode of our 5th year, it is very clear to me at this point that the Ed and Lorraine Warren were one of two things. One is paranormal investigators who went into these homes that were super haunted and super possessed and somehow managed to, in every single case, basically wrap it up with a nice bow and say like, oh, it's no longer haunted, and that explains why no one else will ever experience anything ever again, which is a nice thing to believe, and it's also pretty far-fetched, but it's not impossible. Or they were folks who would be called in for things that were, paranormal situations, and they would look at it from an aspect or an angle of, here's how you can make this profitable,
Right.
Here's how you can turn your stories and your experiences into something where you can make money off of it. And in a lot of cases, these people leave these homes, especially not in this case, I don't believe, but especially in the cases of people who own homes that they're trying to get out of, where someone else will come get it, despite the fact that it might be, not in the best of shape, because if you tag something with haunted, it instantly becomes more desirable to a certain group of people.
Right.
And we hear this all the time, that Ed, or Lorraine in particular, Ed, would convince people just say whatever the super scary things are. And it's a criticism that we hear brought up about him a lot. And then Lorraine playing the psychic, I'm not sure what her role in this was, because we don't really hear a lot where she's the one that was encouraging people on what to say or coaching them through what their story should be. But that's just based off of the things that people say after the fact. Even the people that were at Amityville, years later stated that they made the whole thing up. And that's something that we covered in our Amityville episode. Some of the members of the family claimed that all that stuff happened, and they stuck to that for the longest time. But some of the members in the family did state yeah, we made it all up. The Warrens helped us figure out what we're going to say because we want to get out of the house and da-da-da-da-da.
Well, the Enfield thing.
The Enfield poltergeist. Yeah, there's multiple pictures that they took of that girl jumping on the bed that we covered the Enfield poltergeist a long time ago too. And they just picked one where it looked like she was floating the most. So when you find all those pictures online, you're like, oh, okay, well, it's clear that one might have been a hoax. And the picture that was supposed to be the most famous of her floating certainly looked like it was fake. And then you find all the other ones where it's they were trying it out and it didn't work out well. But those Polaroids eventually surfaced. So when you hear about some of these, and then you hear that those accusations levied after the fact, it definitely makes you think I wonder what was really going on here.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of the sensationalized tales are because of book authors, like this couple that is talking about their house being haunted. They went on to write a book. So these book authors, these film creators, they just want to make a story that sells. Under scrutinized investigation, their stories seem muddled and confusing. There's a lot of back and forth trying to figure out what the truth really is. There are those, though, that do back the reports of the haunting. Some neighbors reported seeing the family outside their home in the middle of the night, they're too scared to be inside their own house. Another claimed to have seen a mysterious green glow coming from one of their rooms, which admittedly could be a bunch of different things. But the one who saw this glow, Joan Mirabel, told the local newspaper that she doesn't think that they made the whole thing up. She put the blame on the media for this story growing the way it did.
Yeah.
Because every time they came back to talk to the mom, she would just talk more stories to it. And it's just because they kept wanting more. She kept making more.
I think that's kind of what they coach them through too, is the PR of having a haunted house.
Right.
You know, how to keep people interested, how to get national attention versus local attention and things like that.
The Warrens' nephew, John Zaffis, was so terrified by a number of occurrences that he refused to return to the home for a number of days. He was just like, nah, I've seen enough. I'm good. I'm out. I'll be back in a week. But whether or not the whole thing was a hoax, a good story is a good story. So I thought that, I mean, the movie is good, you know? It's an interesting story. The family making up stuff, sure. Maybe the place isn't actually haunted, but they know how to weave quite the tale.
I think what happens in a lot of cases is the truth lies somewhere in the middle. It's not as sensationalized as, you know, the book or the Ed and Lorraine version of the story or the movie would have you believe, but it's not completely benign. You know, they had some things that did happen to them. Those are the things that they talk about. And I think that's what sort of garners people to like kind of believe what they're saying.
Right.
Is because they talk about something that it sounds like they really did experience. Then through retellings and shapings of the story, it becomes more sensationalized and things like that. But either way, this one is definitely really creepy of how much stuff from the actual story got used in the movie, since so many times there's such a far departure of what actually happened. So
yeah,
I found that very interesting. But
yeah.
Either way, good stuff, Robin.
Thanks.
All right. So before we move into my topic, we're going to take a quick commercial break. And we are back. So this week for my topic, my brain is totally fried. I am a hollowed out human being right now, and emotionally, I'm just sort of all over the place. So the first disaster for Disaster December, I guess, would be me. So that's always fun.
Wow.
Not really, but kind of. That said, there are definitely plenty of other disasters to talk about for the show that are infinitely more interesting and compelling than anything with me. So in the spirit of the holiday season, I decided to cover a topic that really focuses on the season.
Oh, God. Okay.
Not really, or at all.
Oh, okay.
But the spirit of the season, for sure. If the spirit of the season was eating people. So that's right, folks. In case you didn't read the title of the episode or hear me when I mentioned it earlier, I'm going to be covering Cannibal Island, which has nothing to do with Christmas at all.
Okay.
Now, I will say that this isn't exactly a disaster in the traditional sense either. The ground isn't going to shake. There isn't going to be a big storm. There's no natural events that are going to occur that cause this to happen. Even by man-made disaster standards, this is a bit of a stretch. But that said, this was a man-made situation that we look back on nowadays and say, man, what a fucking disaster. So I think that qualifies. Okay. So let's dive in. So back in the day, there was this thing called the Soviet Union. And for those of you who haven't heard of it before, Jesus, you must be young. It's Russia. The Soviet Union is Russia, basically. And it had a leader at the time of this story known as Joseph Stalin. Stalin was, in most people's opinions, including history's opinion in most cases, not a great dude. Feel free to Google him if you must. There's tons to learn. During his reign, which was quite long, this whole situation happened. So this goes back to 1933.
All right.
Y'all remember 1933, right?
What if there's someone out there that listens to us who's like, yes, I do remember 1933.
Then you're pretty old. Just saying, you're like 88 years old, 87 years old, right around there. But okay, 1933, the Great Depression was at its all-time high. It drove unemployment in the U.S. to 25.2%.
Whoa.
That means over 1 out of every 4 people were unemployed. Hitler became the Chancellor of Germany and opened his first concentration camp.
What?
And the 21st Amendment passed, repealing the 18th Amendment. Yes, the 18th Amendment was prohibition, so guess 1933 wasn't all bad. February of 1933, 2 guys named Genrikh Yagoda and Matvey Berman were said to have gone to Joseph Stalin and said, "Yo, dog, we have this genius idea." And of course, this is in Russian. We've been calling it the Grandiose Plan, an actual nickname for their plan.
I'm trying to think of what a Russian accent sounds like, and I'm so tired. My brain is just not processing.
I know what it sounds like in my brain. I also know my mouth cannot do it at 3:30 in the morning. They went on to say, we should resettle folks into the rough regions and we should take them from the successful agricultural regions so these shitty places can have a yield. To which Stalin said, okay, which is, I'm pretty sure, how he sounded. Now, I should say, Yagoda and Berman were not agricultural engineers trying to figure out how best to farm land that was very difficult to farm. They were professional assholes. Yagoda was the head of the secret police of USSR, and Berman was the head of the Gulag labor camp system.
What?
Side note, yes, it is called that for folks who have only played Call of Duty's Battle Royale and have only heard the term Gulag used for when you die in the game.
Pretty much. That's me.
I figured it would be. Anywho, when you have two world-class pieces of shit like these dudes suggesting to resettle 2 million people, something
That's a lot of people.
Might go wrong. And one of the locations that was picked to be settled was a swampy island roughly 2 miles long and 650 yards wide called Nazino Island. It was actually an island in a river, not even a lake, to give you the idea of like kind of how long it is. So think a smaller Tarvalon if you're watching Wheel of Time right now.
Damn it.
You might be saying, what sort of agricultural yield are they expecting from such a bizarre location, especially since it's a swamp?
But, I mean, there's water, so wouldn't you be able to grow stuff?
Do you see a lot of farms and swamps, Robin? Not
Right.
really. Just because water's there doesn't mean you're necessarily going to get...
Rice paddies are just big, gigantic swamps.
Well, I should also mention that this is smack dab in the middle of Siberia.
Oh,
So
ice.
it's not the best location.
Ice, baby.
And that's kind of the point here, is that they weren't really looking to get anything out of this land. You see, the problem with this terrible plan being run by terrible people is that they weren't sending farmers to the quote-unquote virgin land like they had proposed. Instead, they were gathering up folks from Moscow and Leningrad, which are cities, who were criminals or gangsters or folks who didn't work for the government, which was looked down on.
So it's like sending people to Australia.
Kind of. They basically took anyone that the people in charge didn't like. So it's not like it's being this like criminal place. It's anyone who doesn't align with, if you pissed off your boss and he worked for the government, you could go.
Wow.
It's just these pieces of shit decided they're going to grab up anyone they thought was not someone they wanted around or in these cities, and they're just going to send them away. This meant refugees from other parts of the Soviet Union that had come into these cities to avoid the famine that was currently happening in the countryside were also rounded up. So these people were misplaced because they had no food, and they were taken and told, like, we're going to put you somewhere where you can grow food. And they're like, we're not farmers. And then any merchants who were in the town that were not in good standing, or any traders who were not looked upon favorably, were also included. It was basically a big shit show of horrible people pointing at folks they didn't like or didn't have a way to exploit yet, and saying, send them to the virgin land, they'll get it done. And so guards rounded them up, which isn't shocking considering one of the dudes here was running the secret police for Russia.
All right.
So this was proposed in February. By May 18th, ships filled with people forcibly relocating landed on Nazino Island and began basically setting up what would be a giant battle royale, which is funny because I mentioned Call of Duty earlier, which is the mode where they have the gulag.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what's happening here. On May 18th, there were 4,905 individuals relocated to this island, which I remind you is only 2 miles long and 650 yards wide.
Yeah.
They're dropping off roughly 5,000 people. 4,556 were men. 322 of them were women.
I have a feeling there's going to be a lot of bad stuff going on.
27 of them, in case you're keeping track of the math, 27 of them were already dead. They died on the trip, and they were just dumped on the island because they're like, yeah, you guys should just bury them, and you probably want to get used to that. No foreshadowing or anything. Side note, 45, 56 for men, 322 for women. This is really one bad sausage party. What is this? Newmont College of Computer Science in Salt Lake City, Utah? Yeah, I Googled it. That's the university in the United States that has the most dudes, 88.94%.
That's fucked up. I
It's a
can't
rough
believe you looked
ratio.
it up.
The top 35, there's like 10 universities within Pennsylvania that are just giant sausage fests. So just don't go to college at any of those if you're looking to have like an even 1-to-1 ratio. I was really looking for one from Indiana that I could make fun of, and none of them were in the top 35.
Wow.
So I was just like, fuck it. This is good enough. Anyways, these people were literally being dumped here with no supplies and just being told to figure it out, survive. It's like Squid Games, but they didn't have any squids. I don't know. I didn't really pay attention to that show.
You did. Don't lie to me.
I should note, again, this is remote Siberia. They not only have no supplies with which to farm this land, they have no shelter. They have nothing. It might have been May, but it was still very cold, and the nights are very, very cold. These folks were being abandoned, and they were already in bad shape. It said when they were dropped off, a third of them didn't even have the strength to stand once they were put ashore. They were just in the worst shape they could be, or so they thought. The government wound up bringing in 20 tons of flour for distribution to the people on the island so they would have something to eat while they were supposedly going to start settling this land. But when they started giving it out for the first day, fights broke out from the people standing in line. The guards handled this the only way you would imagine guards forcibly relocating people could, and they just started firing on the crowd and left.
What?
And they took the flour with them.
What?
They set up a camp on a bank opposite of the island, which could probably be seen, judging from the location of this island, and they arranged to bring the flour in, and they told them, for every 150 people, you have to pick someone who's going to be the representative that's going to show up, and we're going to give them the flour, and they're going to bring it back to you. So this was not a good idea.
They're like making Hunger Games districts.
Yeah, essentially what winds up happening here, it's not shocking that the people who get quote-unquote voted are the criminals, the people who are just like charismatic and want to be in charge, essentially. And they immediately begin establishing power over the other people on the island because they control the only food source. Or so they thought. Being that this island literally has nothing on it, including and especially ovens, people had no fucking clue what to do with the flour. They started mixing it with river water, and then they just started consuming that mixture.
You cannot. I mean, you can, but you should not eat raw flour.
Correct.
You have to cook it.
It's still the first day, mind you. People went to bed that night, probably hoping that the next day would be better. A lot of times when I have a bad day, I go to sleep and I'm like, tomorrow's going to be better. Everything's going to be okay.
How many started shitting themselves?
But, a lot. That said, when I go to bed, I'm usually inside a house, which these people were not. It's like, who can pick the nicest tree to basically use as shelter in the middle of fucking Siberia? In the morning, 300 individuals had already died on the island. Realizing the situation was totally boned, a group of these folks decided to make some rafts and attempt to get off the island. Most of the rafts were destroyed by the river as they were trying to cross, and those people drown. There are reports of bodies washing up on the shore opposite the island quite frequently while this was still in operation. The relocation teams were still there, and they were patrolling the beach so that anyone that did make it to the shore were hunted down for sport and killed to send a message to the people of the island that they're there for a purpose and apparently they need to do it or die.
Oh, those Russians.
It should be noted that around the time this was happening, Stalin officially declined the proposal to do this. So essentially they asked permission and just started rounding people up. So cut back to the 5,000 people or so that actually made it to the island, even though this was not like an official project or anything.
Yeah.
And they did this all over, by the way. There's basically no food to eat except for this raw flour. And escaping will lead to certain death. And the people put on the island almost all didn't know how to farm because they were from the fucking city and they didn't take actual farmers. They just took people that were in opposition to whoever was in charge. Imagine any boss you've ever argued with or you knew that didn't like you. If this was in this situation, you'd be on this island right now simply because that person was in charge. Very quickly, these folks decided that they were actually dropped with a pretty good supply of food. And all hell broke loose. So groups of criminals and newly formed gangs of folks who may not have been criminals in their previous lives but have decided this is the only way they're going to survive, start attacking individuals on the island and murdering them with the purpose and intent of eating their victims for food.
What the fuck?
And they followed through. Oh, did they follow through. These people were dropped off on May 18th. It's said that when the relocation team sent a team of doctors to check on the new island dwellers on May 21st, 3 days later, there were already 5 confirmed cases of cannibalism the doctors saw as soon as they got off the boat.
What?
The guards would try and quell the cannibalism, but by the end of the month, which is only May 31st, they had already arrested 50 different people for eating other human beings.
God.
And those are the only cases that they could confirm. This was happening all over the island. People were quote unquote disappearing. It's like, but they saw campfires burning and they could smell meat being cooked. The relocation teams continued to distribute the flour to the points of contact to be distributed to the settlers, still not figuring out that this was going to be a problem. But no shelters or tools were ever going to be brought to these folks. They were apparently going to have to make everything by hand, like this is some weird fucking survival video game. They continued to mix the flour with river water, which gave a bunch of them dysentery. And if you think fever, abdominal pain, bloody diarrhea, and always feeling like you need to shit sounds like fun, imagine doing it in the Siberian wilderness while people are trying to eat you. Because that is the reality of what's happening to these people on this island. After 9 days, on May 27th, the second batch of folks arrives. So 1,200 additional people were dropped onto Nazino Island, which at this point the inhabitants were calling the Island of Death. Can you imagine getting off these fucking boats and just seeing burial sites and bodies everywhere? I imagine there's literally someone with like an arm like it, just gnawing on it, just like staring at you as you're getting off the boat. These people didn't even have shovels to dig graves, so anyone who managed to be buried were probably done in the loose soil near the beach and not very deep. I can only begin to imagine what the smell was like on this island after 9 days. So this second group of people were basically walking into the fucking Thunderdome when they got off those boats. Like whatever mob rule had been established on this island was established. It may have actually been slightly more beneficial for the second group to arrive when they did, because the first group had already been thinned out significantly and weakened from the fact that they were staying in the outdoors. They were being exposed to all these different things. And for the people who were at least eating well, they're having to eat human beings, you know?
Yeah.
They kept giving them flour and sending the doctors in. The doctor's official diagnosis at this point was, quote, "Please God, get us out of here." Because every time they went, they did not want to be on this island. So more armed guards were sent with the doctors every time they attended the island to keep them safe. And then people started dropping like flies that had eaten the raw flour with water because the dysentery was dehydrating them so bad because they're basically shitting themselves to death.
Yeah.
That they just started dying. The only food source that was to be found was human beings. An eyewitness said this of the account, someone who survived. I'm not sure if this was a guard or someone that was actually on the island. Trigger warning if you're squeamish or hungry. On the island, on the island, there was a guard named Kostya Venikov, a young fellow. He was courting a pretty girl who had been sent there. He protected her. One day, he had to be away for a while. People caught the girl, tied her to a poplar tree, cut off her breasts, her muscles, everything they could eat, everything. They were hungry. They had to eat, which is a really shitty excuse. When Kostya came back, she was still alive. He tried to save her, but she had lost too much blood. End
Gross.
quote. That was the reality of what was happening on this island. The settlement was just a massive island of dead bodies and cannibals hunting each other for food or eating the pieces of the fallen that they could find. A lot of these people were wasting away to nothing, so there wasn't a lot of meat to be found on the bone since your body consumes it for energy as you're starving. The attempt to settle Nazino Island didn't really last much longer. Now, I will say there's a lot of conflicting information on the internet of how long this lasted. Some folks say that it was stopped in June. Some folks say that it went on until July. Some folks say that it went on until August. The official records state that it was shut down in early June of the same year. So they weren't even there for like a full month. The Soviet Union ordered that the settlement be shut down and its inhabitants were to be relocated to different settlements to still work. The relocation teams arrived on the shores and basically said like, all right, y'all hop on, like we're taking you somewhere else. And hop on they did. Kind of. Not really. Of the 6,105 individuals that had been placed on the island either on May 18th or May 27th, only 2,856 of them remained. Less than half survived less than a month on this island, 157 of these people that they're trying to load on the boats were left on the island and could not be relocated, and this is the official reasoning, quote unquote, for health reasons.
They were eating people.
They were like, I think for health reasons means they had so much meat taken off of their bones, either from wasting away, being sick, or literally having it harvested off of their bodies. That they're like, we can't take this person.
This video on YouTube is going to get demonetized straight up.
Pretty much. In fact, things had been so god-awful on this island that when the settlers were pulled off, the relocation team had to tell the government that most of them weren't able to even be assigned to new work. The government was the type of government where if you delivered bad news, you could be jailed or just killed outright. But these folks were so fucked up, the relocation team had to tell them anyways. There was nothing they could do about it. When the government asked, all right, like how many can be sent to work right now? You pulled like 2,700 people off that island. The relocation team had to reply with, 250? Only 250 people were in good enough shape to be moved somewhere and start working. Everyone else was so run down, they were either bedridden with disease or injury or both, that they needed to be sent somewhere to be rehabilitated before they could even think of putting them somewhere to work because they were so fucking bad off. Most of them were sent to new settlements anyways, and inhabitants in these new settlements that had also been relocated were forced to take them in with the idea that they would mend them back to health and then they'd all be put to work together. That just wasn't going to be the case with a lot of these folks. There was just not a lot you could do to make them better. One woman was relocated to a nearby village and the people she was placed with tried to take care of her. And there's another trigger warning for similar content here. I mean, it's called Cannibal Island. I know what you expected, but here we go. This is what the caretaker said when speaking on this decades later of the person that was placed with them. Quote, once a woman from the island of death was brought to our house. She was being taken to another camp. The woman was taken into the back to spend the night, and I saw that her calves had been cut off.
Ew.
I asked, and she said, they did that to me on the island of death, cut them off, and cooked them. All the meat on her calves was cut away. Her legs were freezing because of this, and she wrapped them up with rags. She was able to move on her own. She looked like an old woman, but she was really just a little over 40.
That's messed up.
From spending less than a month on this island, she had no... Can you imagine, like, anytime you've ever, like, pulled your calf muscle, like, just imagine that being taken off and then trying to walk. And that was the reality, because if she couldn't stand up to get on that boat, they were leaving her.
Yeah.
Like, that was the reality of this. And it's just something that happened, and everyone was told, like, okay, cool, we're going to send you to your next job that you're not going to get paid for so that you can settle these lands elsewhere. While it's believed that nearly 3,500 people died in a matter of weeks, the official report from the Soviet Union lists it a bit differently. It doesn't really soften the impact of it. It just kind of changes the narrative a little bit here. Still pretty heinous. They believe that the number is closer to 1,500 to 2,000 that died of either starvation, exposure, disease, murder, or accident. If you went to the island of death and like you tripped getting on the boat to leave and died, that would probably be the most tragic thing. Like you survived like a real life battle royale and then you died of accident on the way off. The other 2,000 folks that died are listed as disappeared with whereabouts untraceable and presumed dead. But, like I said earlier, the relocation team was hunting down anyone who actually made it across the river. So most of them either wound up drowning, which is why their location is unknown because the river carried them away, or when they were attempting to escape, they were hunted down and left for dead wherever they were caught, you know?
Yeah.
It is possible some folks actually managed to escape. And if that's the case, they have no record of where they went, so they might have been safe after that, but they still had to live in the Siberian wilderness unless in 1933 they found a way to get the fuck out of there. I could not find any eyewitness accounts of folks stating that they were escapees because realistically, up until like 1990, if you admitted that, you probably would have been killed.
Yep.
So most of the people who might have gotten off of the island grew old and died to the point where they could never come out and actually say, oh yeah, I was on that island. A man named Vasily Velichko decided to write a report in 1933 on what happened on Cannibal Island, or the Island of Death, in July of that year, which is where a lot of folks say, like, oh no, they're on the island until July. It's because this is when the investigation that this guy did independently started. And he detailed the disgusting brutality and the incompetent leadership causing this to take place. And he slapped a top secret sticker on this report after he wrote it up, and he sent it to Moscow. Anyone who has any familiarity with this sort of government regime knows they just don't like having things that have been done wrong pointed out. It's not that something happened, it's that if you ignore it, you can basically state that it never occurred in the first place. And this dude wrote a report and sent it to Moscow saying this is what happened.
Wow.
It was received as fact. It was shocking, the fact that they looked at this and said, oh, this is actually what happened. And typically the person who wrote the report will be jailed or killed. They investigated it further and were able to validate almost all of the claims that were in the report. The people in charge of the on-site relocation team tried to claim it was all lies. They tried to discredit Vasily. They basically tried to make it so that he would be the one that would be punished and not them. But they were all found guilty and sentenced to years of prison and hard labor. So they wound up being part of this experiment that they had been previously on the other side of, basically.
So messed up, dude.
The two assholes in charge didn't ever have to deal with any of the repercussions of their actions in this way that I was able to find, but I didn't do a deep dive into their history. But for the folks that were part of the relocation team, they were like, yeah, just fucking give them flour, whatever, they'll figure it out. Those people wound up being part of the hard labor experiments. People from the nearby villages still visit this island to this day in the summer, around May and June, to leave a wreath at a wooden cross that has been put there as a memorial to these folks, because it is so widely known as one of the most horrific things to happen in the history of the Soviet Union and the regimes that came before that.
That's crazy.
The Russian people are very hard people. They've been through a lot, and this is still remembered as something that is kind of one of the most brutal events, not only in their history, but in human history. It's like 6,000 people were dumped on a tiny island with literally nothing, and just told, like, figure it out.
Yeah.
Here's some flour for you. Maybe that'll work. Oh, wait, no, you'll also get sick from that. And they bring a wreath every summer, and they leave it at this big wooden cross that is the memorial on the island. It was called a grandiose plan, and it was certainly not. Absolute fucking disaster? Sure. I think that's more applicable, though.
It's just so much bad stuff happened on that island.
Yeah. And that, my spooky friends, is the story of Cannibal Island.
Thank you for that disgustingly enlightening topic.
You're welcome. And I was like, there's got to be ghost stories about this. There's not, and I'll tell you why. People really don't go there except to drop off that wreath.
Really?
It's called an Island of Death. They kind of just leave it be. There was stories where the nearby villages were told, like, since the experiment failed, you guys should go there and harvest any, like, wild berries or anything that are growing. And they went and they told them, like, there is nothing but bones and bodies there. We're not going back. They basically told people, they were, like, telling them to go do stuff at gunpoint, like, fuck you. You can shoot me. I'm not going back to that island. So basically no one goes there anymore. But yeah, it's quite the interesting tale. Quite the horrific thing that happened back in the day.
It is definitely horrific.
I would call it scary-ish.
No, it's straight up scary.
It's straight up scary, but hopefully you guys found it fascinating in the same way I did. But yeah, that's it for my topic. If you all have a story that you would like to send to us,
maybe it's about cannibals.
You can if you want to. That would be really weird to get a cannibal story. But email storytime@scaryish.com. You can also go to our website, scaryish.com, click on contact us, fill out that form. It comes directly to us. Or hit us up on our social medias. Facebook is facebook.com/scarishpodcast. Twitter is @scarishpod, and Instagram is @scarishpodcast. We would love to hear from you. Not cannibal related, maybe. It's up to you, but we prefer like supernatural, spiritual, coincidental, extraterrestrial, true crime. If you have a cannibal story, I guess you can send it our way. Robin, for folks who would like to donate to us, how can they do so?
You can go to patreon.com/scarishpodcast, and those are monthly donations. Tiers start at $1. And I would like to give a shout out to a couple special patrons out there who are huge supporters of us. Jessica and Ethan, you guys are absolutely amazing. Thank you so much for your continued support in making this possible.
Yeah, absolutely. You guys are amazing.
And if you guys aren't into the monthly donations, you can also go to ko-fi.com/scarishpodcast, and those are one-time donations.
Indeed. Yeah. And I think that's just about everything we have for episode 209. So, Robin, go ahead and sign us out.
Keep on creeping on, and we'll talk to you guys later.
Bye-bye.